If you drove 30 miles south of San Francisco today, you might think you were heading toward ordinary suburbs or quiet foothills. But hidden deep inside the Santa Cruz Mountains sits a place that looks nothing like the modern world around it. Here, surrounded by trees and rolling land, lies one of California's most breathtaking secrets, Filoli. Filoli is not just a house. It is a 54,000 square foot Georgian-style mansion wrapped in 16 acres of formal gardens and surrounded by 654 acres of protected land that once fed San Francisco's drinking water. People from all around the world come here today, over 400,000 visitors each year, to walk through garden rooms, admire the neatly clipped hedges, and explore a house so elegant that Hollywood once chose it to represent pure power and wealth. But Filoli was not always a public treasure. For nearly 60 years, it belonged to two families, and the story behind it is filled with triumph, tragedy, ambition, loss, and a dream that ended with 4 graves hidden quietly on the property. The man who built Filoli controlled something more valuable than gold. He controlled water, the very thing that every home, every business, and every person in San Francisco needed. He also owned one of California's richest gold mines. When he decided to build this enormous estate, William Bowers, born II, was already a powerful figure, the kind of man newspapers wrote about and politicians feared. His fortune today would be worth billions. But there was one thing his money could not stop: time. Filoli is not just a story about gardens and ballrooms. It is a story about a man who tried to build a paradise while his health slowly failed him. About a daughter who lived and died far across the ocean. About a wife who watched her world shrink until almost everything she loved was gone. And about another woman, years later, who saved the entire estate from destruction by giving it away to the public. When you walk through Filoli today, you will not see the family graves. They are not included on the official tour, but they are there, quiet, tucked into a private spot beneath trees, and their presence tells a deeper truth. This place was not just an estate, it became a family's final chapter. Before Filoli became a symbol of California's golden age, before it became the last surviving grand estate on the San Francisco peninsula, it was supposed to be something very simple. It was meant to be a place where its owner could grow young. Instead, it became the place where a dynasty ended. To understand how Filoli came to be, we need to go back to the beginning, to a time when William Bowers, born I, father of the man who built Filoli, was trying to hold an empire together. William Bowers, born II, never expected to inherit anything. In January 1875, at just 17 years old, he was studying classics at Cambridge University in England. That was when a telegram arrived with no warning at all. His mother demanded that he return home immediately. His father's estate was collapsing. The investments were falling apart. The family fortune was disappearing by the day. The young man who boarded the ship home had grown up in wealth on San Francisco's Nob Hill. His father, William Bourne Sr., had arrived in California during the gold rush with nothing. Through mining, banking, insurance, and real estate, he rose to extraordinary wealth, the kind of wealth that allowed the family to live like royalty. But something had gone terribly wrong. In 1869, William Sr. had purchased controlling interest in the Empire Mine near Grass Valley, one of the earliest hard rock gold mines in California. At first, the mine thrived, but soon the ore began to run out. Water kept flooding the deep shafts, mining costs climbed, and by 1874, the Empire Mine was barely profitable. Then tragedy struck. In July 1874, while cleaning a revolver in his study, William Sr. suffered a fatal gunshot wound. No one ever determined for certain if it was an accident or something darker. Back at Cambridge, William II received the news. When he returned to California, he discovered a financial disaster waiting for him. His father's investments had been tangled together in dangerous ways. Debt was piling up, and the Empire Mine was on the brink of failure. He was only 22 years old when he faced the biggest choice of his life: let the empire collapse, or fight to save it. He chose to fight. Everyone told him the mine was finished, but William VI believed the problem was not the gold. It was how they were trying to reach it. Engineers said it was impossible to mine profitably below 1,200 feet because water seeped in too quickly. But William refused to accept that. He believed the richest gold vein was even deeper. He brought in his cousin, George Starr, a 19-year-old with a sharp understanding of mining technology. Together, they reorganized everything. They added new pumping systems, brought in better drills, and hired skilled Cornish miners from England, men whose families had worked in mines for hundreds of years and knew how to handle waterlogged shafts. For several years, the Empire Mine barely made enough to stay open, but William II kept pushing deeper, 1,500 feet, then 1,800, then 2,000. In 1884, the mine became profitable again. Over the next 40 years, the Empire Mine produced nearly 6 million ounces of gold, making it one of the richest mines in California history. The young man who had raced home from Cambridge had saved the family fortune and built something even greater, but gold alone was not enough for him. By the 1890s, William II turned his attention to something every growing city desperately needed: water. San Francisco's population was booming, and its few springs and wells could not keep up. Private water companies fought bitter wars to control the supply. One company eventually rose to the top, the Spring Valley Water Company. And William II began quietly buying shares. Spring Valley controlled enormous amounts of watershed land in San Mateo County, including the Crystal Springs Reservoir. Because it operated as a private company providing a public service, it had the power of eminent domain, meaning it could take land for the public good, even while making a profit. By 1898, William Bowers-Bourne II became president of the company. Suddenly, he controlled the water supply for hundreds of thousands of people. He set the water rates. He decided which neighborhoods received service. This made him incredibly wealthy and deeply unpopular. San Franciscans paid 24 cents per 1,000 gallons of water, while people in Los Angeles, which had a city-owned water system, paid only 10 cents. Newspapers turned on him. Cartoonists drew Spring Valley as a giant octopus choking the city. Editorials demanded public ownership. But William VI didn't care what the newspapers said. He believed private companies ran things better than the government, and he ran Spring Valley efficiently, keeping water flowing even while criticism grew. Still, he knew the monopoly could not last forever. San Francisco was already planning a new water system that would pipe water from the Sierra Nevada hundreds of miles away. It would take decades, but eventually his company would be replaced. For now, though, William II controlled something every person in the city needed. By 1914, he was 57 years old. He owned a mansion in San Francisco, the Empire Mine Cottage in Grass Valley, and even Muckross House in Ireland. He held investments in gas companies, banks, and real estate. He had everything a Gilded Age industrialist could want, except a peaceful country estate where he and his wife could escape the noise of the city. A place to entertain, a place to garden, a place, in his words, to grow young. So, he began searching the San Francisco peninsula for land. He wanted privacy. He wanted water. And in 1914, he found exactly what he was looking for. In 1914, William Bowers-Bourne II found the land he had been searching for. It stretched across the eastern slope of the Santa Cruz Mountains, looking down toward two massive reservoirs that held the water he controlled. The property was enormous, 654 acres of untouched hills, creeks, oak trees, and open space. To William, it was perfect. He had walked these hills before, as president of the Spring Valley Water Company. He knew where the ground stayed moist, even in dry summers. He knew where the springs appeared and where the small streams ran. He even knew that the San Andreas Fault ran directly through the land. But instead of seeing danger, he simply saw California for what it was. You built carefully, you respected the land, and you made something beautiful anyway. Most wealthy families in the early 1900s built their country estates in places like Burlingame or Hillsborough. Those neighborhoods had neighbors, roads, and beautiful homes right next door. But William didn't want neighbors. He wanted privacy, silence, and control over everything around him. He wanted an estate as large as the land itself. The location was close enough to San Francisco for him to reach easily, about a 30-mile drive that took an hour in the cars of the time. That meant he could visit the estate often while still handling business in the city. To him, it was the perfect blend of escape and accessibility. His wife, Agnes Moody Bourne, was 53 at the time. Their only surviving child, Maud Ma Bourne, was already married and living in Ireland. This estate would not be a place filled with the laughter of children. It would be the next chapter of their lives, a place for hosting elegant gatherings, enjoying music, and creating gardens that would take decades to mature. William had a personal credo he carried with him all his life. It was made of 3 short ideas: fight for a just cause, love your fellow man, live a good life. When he combined the first 2 letters of each phrase, Fi, Lo, Li, he created a single word, Filoli. That would be the name of his estate. Most visitors today think Filoli sounds Italian. They never know that the name is actually a secret code hidden in plain sight, a personal reminder of the values William believed in. Now that he had the land, he needed a home worthy of it, and for that, he turned to one person he trusted. Designing a dream. Willis Jefferson Polk was one of California's most respected architects. He was 57 years old when William contacted him in 1914. For decades, he had designed mansions, banks, office buildings, and impressive city landmarks. He knew how to create beauty, but more importantly, he knew how to create beauty that lasted. William had already worked with him. Polk had designed the Bourne Mansion on Webster Street in San Francisco and the Empire Mine Cottage in Grass Valley. So, when William decided to build Filoli, he made only one call: the call to Polk. When Polk arrived on the site, he immediately felt inspired. The land rolled outward in long, gentle slopes. The hills hugged the property like protective walls. Looking down from the higher elevations, he saw the reservoirs glowing between the mountains. He understood the assignment instantly. This house needed to feel grounded in the land. It could not be tall and flashy. It had to spread across the hillside, extend across the landscape, and feel like it belonged here. Polk chose a Georgian revival style, symmetrical, balanced, classic, and dignified. The kind of architecture that wealthy families in colonial Virginia used. The kind of design that made a statement without screaming for attention. But he also knew this wasn't Virginia. This was California, so he adapted the design. He used red clay tile for the roof instead of slate, because tile belonged to the Spanish missions of the West Coast and handled the California climate better. He designed the brick walls using Flemish bond, a pattern that looks woven and elegant, giving the exterior a subtle richness. Most importantly, he designed the inside around a powerful concept used in European palaces, the enfilade. An enfilade is a sequence of rooms connected along a straight axis. When you stand in the first room, you can see through all the rooms that follow. It creates a sense of grandeur and distance. It makes a house feel larger than it really is. At Filoli, this meant that from the reception room near the entrance, you could look straight through the drawing room and into the dining room. Your eye would travel naturally forward, making you curious to explore more. Polk knew how to shape a visitor's experience from the very first moment. The mansion would include a grand reception hall with a staircase, a formal drawing room, a richly paneled dining room, a massive ballroom, private family rooms upstairs, staff areas in a separate wing, terraces leading out into the gardens. Everything would be arranged with purpose, and everything would be large enough to impress the elite of San Francisco. Construction began in 1915. Workers shaped the land, carved out terraces, and poured strong foundations capable of surviving California earthquakes. Stone from the Empire Mine, waste rock left over after extracting gold, was used around the estate. It was symbolic, like William was literally building his future on the work that had made his fortune. Slowly, the house took shape. The chimneys rose in elegant pairs. The long, red-tiled roof stretched across the hillside. French windows were installed to capture sunlight. Inside, craftsmen carved wood, laid parquet floors, and shaped plaster ceilings. In 1917, after 2 years of work, Filoli was complete. It had cost the equivalent of more than $10 million in modern money, but compared to other Gilded Age estates, like William Randolph Hearst's massive San Simeon, it was modest. Filoli was grand, but not showy. Impressive, but not ridiculous. When William and Agnes moved in that September, they expected to enjoy Filoli for decades. William was 60. Agnes was 56. Their daughter was far away, but life seemed steady. Standing on his new terrace, William looked out over the land he had bought, the land his water company controlled, and felt proud. Everything he had worked for was right before him. He had no idea that within 5 years, his life would change forever. A house for celebration. Filoli was designed for entertaining. That meant the moment you entered the front door, the house needed to send a message, one that whispered wealth, power, and elegance without shouting it. The reception room did exactly that. It rose 2 stories high and was paneled in rich, warm walnut. A grand staircase curved upward, sunlight filtered in through tall windows. Guests arriving for dinner parties or musical evenings stepped into a room that felt both monumental and inviting. From there, they would walk forward through the enfilade of rooms. The drawing room had linen-covered walls and comfortable seating areas arranged near a soft marble fireplace. It was less formal than the reception room, but no less elegant. Next came the dining room, dark oak paneling from floor to ceiling, hand-carved details, and a table that could seat 24 guests. Dinner parties here lasted for hours. Servants moved quietly through hidden doors from the butler's pantry. Crystal clinked, fine dishes were carried in careful order, and the room itself told everyone present that they were in a house built by one of California's most powerful men. But the heart of Filoli's social life was the ballroom. The ballroom stretched 70 feet long, its ceiling rising to more than 20 feet. 2 giant chandeliers hung above a gleaming oak floor. The walls were painted a soft water green color, trimmed in gold leaf. At one end, a massive Baroque fireplace dominated the space, grand enough to belong in a European palace. This was Agnes's realm. She was an accomplished pianist and a supporter of the San Francisco Symphony. She hosted chamber music performances here, seating up to 100 guests. Musicians would fill the room with sound. The high ceiling created perfect acoustics, and through the tall windows, guests could glimpse the gardens outside. Filoli was alive with music, conversation, and laughter. But behind all this beauty was an army of invisible workers. Servants lived in the south wing, small rooms with shared bathrooms. They worked long hours every day, with only a single day off every 2 weeks. Cooks, maids, chauffeurs, gardeners, and butlers all kept the estate running smoothly. Visitors saw only perfection. They never knew how much labor it took to maintain this lifestyle. For a few years, Filoli functioned exactly as William and Agnes hoped. They hosted, they entertained, they enjoyed this masterpiece they had built together. Then, in the summer of 1921, everything changed. William suffered a severe stroke that paralyzed half of his body. The man who had saved a gold mine, built a water empire, and created Filoli with fierce determination, could no longer walk through the gardens he loved. He was only 64, and Filoli would now become something far different from what he had imagined. The stroke that struck William Bowers Bourne II in the summer of 1921 changed everything. Until then, he had been a man defined by action, pushing mines deeper, controlling a city's water supply, expanding his businesses, and shaping enormous landscapes into a home he expected to enjoy for the rest of his life. But that morning, when he tried to sit up and felt his left side refuse to move, all of that came to a halt. Agnes, terrified but composed, immediately called doctors from San Francisco. When they arrived, the diagnosis was clear and grim. William had suffered a major stroke. The damage affected the right side of his brain, leaving the left side of his body weak and unresponsive. In 1921, medicine had no treatment that could reverse such an event. There were no therapies to restore movement, no drugs to help the brain recover. Doctors could only recommend rest and careful monitoring. William survived, but the man he had been was gone forever. His left leg no longer supported him. His left arm hung weakly at his side. His speech was slow and sometimes slurred, though his mind remained painfully sharp. He understood exactly what was happening to him, and the knowledge that he would never again walk his gardens, or stride through his house, or visit his daughter overseas pressed down on him like a weight. A wheelchair became his new reality. Ramps were added to Filoli's entrances. Doorways were widened. Servants helped him move from room to room. Every day of his life now depended on other people. For a man who had spent decades commanding mines, companies, and land, this loss of independence felt like a slow death. Still, there was one thing that continued to inspire him. even if he could not experience it the way he once hoped: the gardens. Designing a living masterpiece. While William struggled with his health inside the house, something extraordinary was happening outside. The formal gardens, 16 acres of terraces, hedges, lawns, and enclosed spaces, were being created with almost the same level of care and ambition that had gone into the mansion. For this, William needed two geniuses. The first was Bruce Porter, an artist, designer, and landscape architect, whose work helped rebuild San Francisco's cultural soul after the 1906 earthquake. Porter was a painter, a stained glass designer, and a creative thinker with a gift for shaping gardens like outdoor architecture. The second was Isabella Bella Warren, a talented horticulturist known throughout the Bay Area for her incredible sense of plant color, texture, and seasonal rhythm. She was 48 years old when she joined the project and already respected among wealthy families who trusted her with their estates. Together, Porter and Bella would create one of America's greatest gardens. Porter designed the structure, the bones of the garden. He walked the land with William, studying where the slopes rose and fell, how the sun traveled across the property, and how the views framed the reservoir and mountains. He believed gardens should unfold like chapters in a book. Each room should lead naturally into the next. Each wall, hedge, and pathway should guide visitors without them even noticing. Bella added life to the structure. She chose the plants, coordinated bloom times, and figured out which flowers, shrubs, and trees could survive in the California climate. She understood color the way a painter understands pigment. She used deep purples, soft whites, rich greens, and seasonal bursts of red and gold to create living artwork that changed throughout the year. Together, they didn't simply plant a garden, they built a world. The garden begins to take shape. The first major space built was the sunken garden, a rectangular area lowered below ground level to create a sense of intimacy and enclosure. At its center was a large reflecting pool holding 8,000 gallons of water, an intentional symbol. Water meant wealth in California, and William, a man who had spent decades controlling water for an entire city, now used it simply for beauty. Water lilies floated on the surface. Stone steps led down to the pool. Japanese yews, clipped into neat shapes, formed walls around the garden. 2 olive trees stood like silent guardians on either side. From there, the central axis stretched upward through a series of walled spaces: the lower terrace, the high place, the woodland garden, the rose garden, the walled garden. Each area had its own purpose and personality. Some were designed for quiet walking. Others were spots for gatherings and lawn games. Some exploded with color. Others used only green shapes and textures. One of William's personal requests was especially meaningful. At Muckross House, the estate he had purchased in Ireland for his daughter, there were magnificent Irish yew trees. He loved them deeply, so he arranged for cuttings from those very yews to be taken, grown at the Empire Mine Cottage in Grass Valley, and then transported to Filoli. Over time, over 200 Irish yews were planted across the grounds, forming long avenues and dramatic lines that still shape the garden today. They served as a living connection between Filoli and the distant home of his daughter, Ma. Gardens like these required enormous labor. Hedges needed constant trimming. Flowers had to be replanted seasonally. Lawns needed mowing. Irrigation systems had to be maintained. By the late 1920s, 12 full-time gardeners worked at Filoli, led by Louis Marinkovich, who would remain at the estate for 50 years. And yet, even as the gardens flourished, William could explore them only through the wheels of a chair. A daughter, across the ocean. To understand the personal tragedy woven into Filoli's story, we must look across the Atlantic to Ireland, and to the life of Maud Ma born Vincent, William and Agnes's only surviving child. Born in 1883, Ma grew up in the Bourne Mansion on Webster Street. She studied music, languages, and art. She was groomed for the life of a wealthy young woman, but she also carried the pressure of expectations. By her mid-20s, she was considered close to being an old maid by society's standards. Then she met Arthur Rose Vincent, an Irishman of good family but limited money. He was 18 years older than she was. His first wife had died, but he was kind, responsible, and from a distinguished background. In 1910, the two married in a grand San Francisco ceremony. As a wedding gift, William purchased an entire Irish estate for them, Muckross House in County Kerry. It was a stunning 19th century mansion surrounded by 11,000 acres of mountains, lakes, and forests. William paid the annual costs of running the estate, a huge amount of money, and gave the young couple a generous allowance. Ma settled into life as an Irish estate lady. In 1911, she was formally presented at the Court of St. James in London, a major social honor. For William, Muckross House was not just a gift. It became a source of inspiration for Filoli. Its gardens, especially the yews, shaped many of his ideas for his new California estate. He visited Ireland as often as he could, but after his stroke, he would never see it again. Painting Ireland into Filoli. Unable to travel and longing for the world his daughter lived in, William turned to art to bring Ireland to him. In 1921, he hired the well-known American painter Ernest Picciotto to create large murals for Filoli's ballroom. Using photographs and descriptions, Picciotto painted sweeping scenes of Muckross House, its lakes, mist-covered mountains, and soft green landscape. When the murals were installed, they transformed the ballroom into a window to Ireland. Whenever William was wheeled into the room, he could look up at the walls and feel as if he were once again walking beside his daughter near Muckross Lake. It was the closest he would ever get to Ireland again. A heartbreaking telegram. The years after William's stroke were difficult but manageable. He could still think clearly, still make business decisions, still spend hours being wheeled to the high point of the garden, where he could look down over his estate. Then, in November 1929, everything shattered. A telegram arrived from New York. Ma had fallen ill with pneumonia while traveling. When her ship docked, her condition had worsened. She died shortly afterward. She was only 45 years old. William was too weak to travel to her funeral. He stayed in his wheelchair at Filoli while Agnes made the trip, alone. When Ma's body was brought back to California, she was buried in a small cemetery on the Filoli estate, next to the infant brother she never knew, who had died a day after birth. For William, the loss was devastating beyond words. His daughter was gone. His health was failing. His dreams were collapsing. He began selling his businesses, putting his affairs in order. The Empire Mine went to a mining company. Spring Valley Water Company prepared to sell its land and assets to the city. The Irish estate that had once filled him with hope was now a painful memory, and the murals in the ballroom, once comforting, now seemed like a doorway into a world he could never enter again. The death of Maud Ma born Vincent in November 1929 marked a breaking point for William Bowers-born II. Though he had already been confined to a wheelchair for years, he had held on to a sense of purpose. He still oversaw business decisions. He still visited the gardens each morning. He still believed there were years left to enjoy Filoli with Agnes. But losing his only surviving child shattered something deep inside him. After Ma was laid to rest in the quiet family cemetery on the estate, William changed. He began withdrawing from the responsibilities that had once defined him. He started selling his major assets, the Empire Mine, various investments, and eventually even Spring Valley Water Company, the empire he had shaped over decades. Each sale was a step toward the end, an act of letting go. At Filoli, life became gentler, quieter, and filled with a kind of sadness that settled into the walls of the house. The ballroom that once hosted music now echoed with silence. The dining room saw fewer grand dinners. The gardens still bloomed, but William could no longer explore them in the way he once planned. Every morning, staff wheeled him to the high point of the garden. There, on top of the terraces, he could see the hedges and flower beds shaped by Bruce Porter and Bella Warren, the house designed by Willis Polk, and the wide reservoir valley he had controlled for so many years. Sometimes Agnes sat beside him. Sometimes he sat alone. The dream he had built at Filoli was beautiful, but its creator was fading. The long decline. By the early 1930s, William was in his 70s. He had endured several smaller strokes after the major one in 1921. Each left him a little weaker. His days were structured around caretaking, meals brought on trays, limited movements through the house, and time in the library reviewing reports he could no longer fully act on. Through all of this, Agnes stayed by his side. She had always supported him, first as a social hostess, then as the backbone of their home, and now as his closest caregiver. She kept the estate running, she managed the gardeners, she supervised the staff, she walked the gardens daily and returned to describe the flowers to William, knowing he could no longer see many of them up close. Their marriage had lasted decades. They had built an empire together, and now she watched him decline in the place he had created for both of them. Outside the gates of Filoli, the world was changing rapidly. The Great Depression swept across the country. Businesses collapsed, families lost homes, banks failed. But behind Filoli's brick walls and clipped hedges, the estate remained steady, quiet, isolated, almost untouched by the chaos outside. Still, even Filoli could not escape tragedy. In January 1936, Agnes Moody Bourne fell seriously ill. The records do not reveal exactly what caused her decline, possibly pneumonia, possibly heart failure, but she was 75 years old and her body was tired. After a lifetime of supporting her husband and maintaining her home, she died peacefully on January 20th, 1936. Her death broke William completely. He had lived through business failures, the death of his father, the loss of his daughter, and years of physical limitation. But losing Agnes, the person who had been at his side through every triumph and sorrow, was something his spirit could not survive. 6 months later, on July the 5th, 1936, William Bowers, born the second, died at Filoli at age 78, weakened by years of paralysis and stroke complications. He was buried beside Agnes and Ma in the small family cemetery on the estate. The fourth grave belonged to the infant son who had died in 1882. The place William built to grow young had become the home of his family's final chapter. After the Bournes, a house without an heir. When William died, Filoli's future was uncertain. There were no immediate family members left to inherit it. Ma had died in 1929. She and Arthur Vincent had no children. William's other relatives had their own lives and properties. Filoli, huge, expensive, and complex to maintain, was suddenly a house without an heir. The estate went on the market in 1937. But selling a 654-acre Gilded Age mansion in the middle of the Great Depression was nearly impossible. Wealthy families were cautious. Many large estates across the country were being divided, demolished, or left to decay. Filoli required enormous staff, constant gardening, continuous repairs, substantial annual costs. Most potential buyers walked away. Then one couple walked in and saw something worth saving. The Roth era begins. In 1937, William Bill Roth and Lurleen Matson Roth visited Filoli. The Roth family was one of California's most successful and influential dynasties. Lurleen's father, Captain William Matson, had founded the Matson Navigation Company, an enormous shipping line that connected San Francisco and Hawaii with its famous white ships. When he died, Lurleen inherited a significant fortune. Her husband, Bill, became president of the company. They already owned homes, including a beautiful residence in San Francisco. But Filoli was something different. It was not just a house. It was an opportunity. Lurleen, an experienced gardener herself, fell in love with the grounds the moment she saw them. The formal layout, the terraces, the color, the structure, everything called to her. She didn't want to replace the gardens. She wanted to expand them, nurture them, and let them flourish. Bill saw a country retreat, a place to relax, raise their children, and escape the pressures of city life. The Roths purchased Filoli in 1937, and just like that, a new chapter began. A gentle transition. Unlike many wealthy buyers who transform an estate to their own tastes, Lurleen respected what the Bournes had created. She never tried to erase their vision. Instead, she treated Filoli like a living collaboration between her family and the Bourne. Although most of the original furniture had been sold before the estate changed hands, the house itself remained intact. The ballroom, with its towering ceilings, the reception hall and grand staircase, the oak-paneled dining room, the murals of Muckross House, the interconnected rooms designed by Willis Polk. Filoli still carried the soul of the Bournes, but now it would carry the touch of the Roths. Lurleen began refurnishing the rooms with taste, care, and an eye for history. But her greatest passion was the gardens, and for that, she turned to one person she trusted deeply: the return of Bella Warren. By 1937, Isabella Bella Warren was 68 years old. She had spent decades shaping gardens for some of the wealthiest families in California. She understood Filoli intimately. She knew every pathway, every hedge, and every planting decision she had made with Bruce Porter. When Lurleen asked her to continue overseeing the gardens, Bella agreed. It was the perfect partnership. Bella had strong opinions and a perfectionist's eye, but Lurleen was equally knowledgeable and respectful. She didn't micromanage. She asked questions, discussed possibilities, and trusted Bella's expertise. Together, they expanded the gardens far beyond what the Bournes had originally created. Lurleen wanted more camellias, more azaleas, more rhododendrons, more color throughout the year, more interest in the woodland spaces. She wanted Filoli to feel alive in every season, not just spring. Under their guidance, the woodland garden flourished. Shade-loving plants were layered beneath the oak trees. New textures appeared. The colors grew richer and more varied. In 1946, Lurleen added something Filoli had never had: a large swimming pool. But even this was done with respect for the estate's design. Bella planned the pool area, the pavilion, and the plantings so that everything blended naturally into the existing garden structure. They even relocated mature Irish yews, heavy, delicate, and difficult to move, to frame the pool area. The task was nearly impossible, but it succeeded. And today, visitors still see those same yews standing tall. The final years of the Roth family at Filoli. By the late 1950s, Bill Roth's health began to decline. Like William Bourne decades before him, he suffered a stroke. The pool had been built partly for his rehabilitation. He used it as therapy during his final years at Filoli. He died in 1963. Lurleen, then 70, continued to care for Filoli with the same dedication she always had. For over a decade, she managed the vast estate, tending the gardens and overseeing a staff that worked tirelessly to maintain its beauty. By the early 1970s, she faced a difficult question. What would happen to Filoli after she was gone? Her 3 adult children had their own lives. The estate was enormous and expensive. Dividing the land would destroy everything. Selling it risked developers tearing it apart. Only one option seemed right. And in 1975, she made a decision that would change Filoli's destiny forever. In the early 1970s, Lurleen Matson Roth was in her 80s, and Filoli had become more than just a home. It had become the purpose of her life. For nearly 40 years, she had poured her creativity, time, and heart into the estate. She expanded the gardens, preserved the architecture, and maintained the standards set long ago by William and Agnes Bourne. But the reality she now faced was unavoidable. Filoli was massive. The mansion had 56 rooms. The garden spanned 16 acres. The surrounding land stretched across 654 acres. Running such an estate required constant labor, a large staff, and an enormous amount of money. And Lurleen's children already had their own lives. They loved Filoli, but none of them wanted to take on a property so demanding. At the same time, California's landscape was changing. Large estates across the state and across the country were being demolished or divided. After World War II, the era of enormous private mansions was ending. Most families could no longer maintain them. Developers wanted land, not history. If Filoli fell into the wrong hands, it could be carved into hundreds of parcels or turned into something completely unrecognizable, and Lurleen could not allow that to happen. She understood that Filoli was not simply a home. It was a historic creation, one of America's last complete Gilded Age estates. Its gardens were irreplaceable. Its architecture was intact. Its history was powerful. So, she made a decision no one expected. She would give it all away. A gift too beautiful to keep. There was only one organization Lurleen trusted to protect Filoli, the National Trust for Historic Preservation. The trust existed for one purpose: to preserve important American places and keep their history alive. When she approached them, the trust immediately recognized Filoli's value. It was rare. It was untouched. It was nearly perfect. But taking on a property of its size required resources. The trust needed assurance that the house and gardens could be maintained properly. For months, both sides worked through the details. Could the trust afford the upkeep? Would Filoli be open to the public? Would the gardens be protected? Would the house remain exactly as the Bournes and Roths had created it? Lurlane asked all these questions and more. She was determined that Filoli would be respected, not turned into a novelty or a commercial attraction. Finally, in 1975, at the age of 82, Lurline Matson Roth made her historic decision. She donated the entire Filoli estate, all 654 acres, the mansion, the gardens, and even an endowment to help maintain it, to the National Trust for Historic Preservation. Her explanation was simple, just one memorable sentence: Filoli is too beautiful to be private. Those 5 words saved Filoli forever. In late 1975, Filoli opened its gates to the public for the first time. For nearly 60 years, from 1917 to 1975, only the Bournes and the Roths walked these paths. Now, anyone could. Garden lovers, history fans, students, tourists. Filoli was now a place for everyone. Lurline moved to a smaller home nearby. She visited Filoli often and lived long enough to see her gift flourish. She died in 1985, leaving behind a legacy of generosity that changed the estate's destiny. Hollywood discovers Filoli. Just a few years after Filoli opened to the public, Hollywood came calling. In 1978, director Warren Beatty needed a location for the film Heaven Can Wait. His team searched for a mansion that looked heavenly, grand, elegant, peaceful, and powerful. They found Filoli. The ballroom became a gym for the movie. Cameras swept over the terraces and gardens. Millions of viewers saw Filoli on screen without realizing it. But the movie was only the beginning. In 1981, ABC launched the TV series Dynasty, a drama about a wealthy family living in a luxurious estate. The show needed an exterior shot of a mansion that could symbolize wealth, romance, drama, and power. They chose Filoli. Every episode opened the same way, an aerial shot of the mansion and its magnificent gardens. Though the show was supposed to take place in Denver, viewers around the world became familiar with Filoli's silhouette. The interiors were filmed on studio sets, but the exteriors were unmistakably real. More than 20 million people watched each episode at its peak for 9 years. Across nearly 200 episodes, Filoli became an international icon without ever speaking a word. Tourism increased. Garden clubs from around the world requested visits. Asian tourists in particular recognized the estate from the opening scenes of Dynasty. Filoli became not just a historic estate, but a pop culture landmark. Other productions followed, commercials, films, and television shows. But nothing matched the reach of Dynasty. For an entire generation, Filoli became that mansion from TV, even if they never knew its real name. A new purpose in the modern world. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Filoli grew in popularity. Its gardens remained spectacular. The estate's horticultural staff worked year-round to maintain the historic plantings inspired by Bruce Porter and Bella Warren. Each season brought something different. Spring, 75,000 bulbs bursting with tulips, daffodils, hyacinths. Summer, roses overflowing in the walled garden. Fall, chrysanthemums and rich autumn colors. Winter, bright camellias, evergreen hedges, and quiet pathways. Inside the mansion, rooms were gradually refurnished. Families with connections to the Bournes and Roths donated period-appropriate pieces. Filoli became a living museum, not frozen in time, but active, breathing, and evolving. Visitors learned about architecture, horticulture, California history, and the lives of the families who shaped the estate. The National Trust added programs for school children, history tours, nature walks, and seasonal festivals. And then, in 2023, Filoli entered the international spotlight once again. A meeting of world leaders. During the APEC conference in November 2023, U.S. President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping needed a secure, private, and symbolic place for an informal summit. They chose Filoli. The images traveled around the world. two of the planet's most powerful leaders walking through Filoli's gardens, standing beneath its trees, and meeting inside its softly lit rooms. For many viewers in China, the location was instantly recognizable. Decades earlier, they had watched Filoli every week in Dynasty. Diplomats explained the meaning behind the location. A place shaped by wealth, ambition, beauty, and history had become a peaceful setting for international conversation. This moment proved something important. Filoli was not just a museum. It was still a place where history happened. Filoli today, a living legacy. Today, over 400,000 people visit Filoli annually. They come from around the world to explore. The ballroom where Agnes Bourne once played piano. The dining room where the Bournes hosted elegant dinners. The terraces overlooking the gardens. The rooms where the Roth family lived for decades. The gardens that continue to bloom exactly as Bella Warren and Lurline Roth planned. Filoli is far more than a preserved mansion. It is one of the last fully intact Gilded Age estates in California, and one of the few in the entire United States that has survived without being divided, sold off in pieces, or radically changed. The National Trust maintains it through membership fees, donations, ticket sales, extensive volunteer programs. And ironically, the estate built by extreme private wealth now survives because of thousands of small contributions from ordinary people. It has become something William Bourne never imagined, a democratic space open to anyone. And yet, one part of Filoli remains. Private, hidden beneath the trees, is a small cemetery containing 4 graves. William Bowers, Bourne the Serrans, Agnes Moody, Bourne, Maud, Ma, Bourne, Vincent, the infant son who died in 1882. Visitors do not see these graves. They are not part of the tour, but they are the quiet heart of Filoli. They remind us that Filoli was built by real people, that it was shaped by dreams and broken by tragedies, that wealth cannot save a family from loss, that beauty can outlive sorrow, and that a place meant for privacy can become a treasure meant for everyone. What Filoli truly represents. When William sat in his wheelchair at the top of the garden, looking down toward the reservoir valley he once controlled, he could not have known what Filoli would one day become. He built it as a retreat, as a symbol of status, as a gift for his wife, as a connection to his daughter in Ireland. But Filoli transformed into something far greater. It became one of the most important preserved estates in American history. It became a backdrop for film and television. It became a place of diplomacy. And it became a sanctuary for anyone who loves beauty. The gold is gone. The water empire dissolved. The fortunes faded. But the gardens remain. The house stands. The vision survives. And that is the true legacy of Filoli. A dream built by one family, saved by another, and now shared with the world. The cold breath from the crowd fogs up the giant display window. Children press their hands against the glass, leaving smudges as they lean closer. Inside the window, tiny mechanical elves bend over wooden workbenches, pretending to build toys. Small metal trains weave through snowy miniature villages, their headlights glowing as they pass through little tunnels dusted with fake frost. Mechanical reindeer lift their heads, blinking slowly as if preparing for their long Christmas Eve flight. Families stand shoulder to shoulder on the sidewalk, trying to soak in every detail before moving on. This is the famous holiday window display of Hudson's, a tradition so special that some people drove hours just to see it. Behind the excited crowd, hundreds of families wait their turn. Parents hold their children's hands, and grandparents stand quietly with warm smiles. Everyone has come to witness the magic that Hudson's created year after year. Inside the building, the scene is even more unbelievable. A gigantic Christmas tree, 9 stories tall, stands proudly in the middle of the grand atrium. Bright lights twinkle from every branch, reflecting off the brass railings and polished marble floors. The tree reaches so high that people on upper floors lean over balconies just to get a better view. During its brightest days, Hudson's wasn't just a department store. It was a towering kingdom of shopping, celebration, and imagination. More than 12,000 employees worked inside this enormous structure. There were 200 different departments spread across 33 levels, including 5 basement floors, endless mezzanines, and countless long hallways. You could buy almost anything here: fancy clothing, fine jewelry, tools, toys, furniture, or even the newest fashion straight from Europe. Hudson's wasn't just Detroit's greatest store. For a long time, it was one of the greatest department stores in all of America. But behind its warm holiday glow lies a story that is far more complicated. Hudson's rise was spectacular, but its fall was just as dramatic. The city that once celebrated this store would later decide to destroy it. How does a place that meant so much become a building that a city chooses to tear down? What happened to turn Detroit's most beloved Christmas destination into a demolition site? The story begins in Detroit's Golden Age, a time when the city was exploding with life, money, and people. Factories roared day and night. The automobile industry was growing so fast that thousands of workers moved to the city every year. Hudson sat right in the middle of this booming world, filling an entire city block. It stretched across 2.2 million square feet, making it one of the largest stores ever built. Inside, the building was alive with constant activity. Waves of customers filled the hallways. Elevators carried people to floors filled with perfumes, suits, books, gadgets, and fine china. The air carried a mix of scents: fresh popcorn from the snack counters, perfume from the cosmetic aisles, and the warm smell of roasted nuts sold in festive cones. During the holiday season, the number of visitors could reach hundreds of thousands. Yet Christmas was when Hudson's truly became something magical. Every year, families from all across Michigan traveled to Detroit to walk along Woodward Avenue and stare into the holiday windows. These weren't simple displays. They were full animated scenes built with moving parts, glowing lights, and tiny details that brought the holidays to life. The windows became so popular that police officers had to control the crowds. People gathered so tightly that their breath covered the glass in fog. Children begged their parents to lift them up so they could see everything. Inside the grand atrium, the famous 9-story Christmas tree stood like a glowing tower. Workers spent days decorating it with thousands of sparkling lights, giant ornaments, and shimmering garlands. When the lights were finally turned on, huge crowds packed the building, cheering as the tree lit up the entire hall. For many Detroit families, this moment marked the official start of the holiday season. On the 12th floor, the store transformed into Santa Land and Toy Town. The smell of candy canes filled the air, and bright decorations hung from every corner. During peak Christmas weeks, almost 500,000 visitors came to this floor alone. Toy demonstrations, mechanical dolls, and model trains entertained children as they waited, sometimes for hours, to meet Santa. His little cottage sat in the corner, complete with a chimney, glowing lanterns, and soft music. Children came dressed in their best winter clothes, ready to sit on Santa's lap and share their Christmas wishes. Hudson's wasn't just a store. It helped shape Detroit's entire holiday culture. In 1924, the company played a major role in creating the Detroit Thanksgiving Day Parade, which eventually became one of the country's most famous parades. For many people, the parade signaled the beginning of the holiday season, and Hudson's was at the heart of it. But Hudson's wasn't only known for the holidays. Even during the warm summer months, the store remained a center of excitement. The building hosted fashion shows that rivaled Paris runways. Restaurants inside the store served thousands of meals each day. There were art exhibitions, displays of European treasures, and even showcases of the latest automobile designs from Detroit's booming car industry. From every angle, Hudson's represented Detroit's power and pride. It symbolized a city that was confident, wealthy, and filled with opportunity. Yet, forces were quietly building that would soon threaten everything Hudson stood for. By the early 1950s, America was changing. Families began moving from crowded cities to quiet suburbs. New shopping centers opened outside downtown areas. These shopping malls had modern designs, air conditioning, and huge free parking lots. People no longer needed to travel into the city to buy clothes or gifts. They could shop closer to home. Detroit was no exception. Suburban neighborhoods grew rapidly. More highways were built. Cars became the main form of travel. And with each passing year, downtown Detroit became a little less crowded. For Hudson's, the change was slow at first. The store had been so powerful for so long that it seemed unstoppable. But beneath the surface, trouble was forming. Trouble that would eventually lead to the end of Detroit's greatest store. The story of Hudson's cannot be understood without first understanding the man whose dream started it all. Long before the famous store rose above Woodward Avenue, a young boy named Joseph Lothian Hudson, known simply as J.L. Hudson, began a journey that would one day reshape Detroit's entire retail world. He was born in 1846 in Newcastle upon Tyne, England, a busy industrial town filled with noise, factory smoke, and the movement of workers heading to long shifts. When he was only 9 years old, his family decided to leave England behind and start a new life in North America. They traveled across the ocean, finally settling in Detroit in 1855. At that time, Detroit was not yet the car capital of the world. It was still a growing city, slowly turning from a small river town into a bustling industrial center. As JL grew up, he quickly learned the value of hard work. Detroit was expanding fast, and new stores, companies, and factories appeared every year. Young Hudson worked in different retail shops, learning how to treat customers, how to arrange products, and how to understand what people wanted. He wasn't born into wealth. He built everything through experience, skill, and an incredible ability to recognize opportunity. In 1881, at the age of 35, Hudson took a risk that would change his life forever. He opened his first store inside the Detroit Opera House building. It wasn't fancy or huge like the department store that would come later, but it was clean, organized, and welcoming. Hudson believed that customers deserved good quality at fair prices. He also believed in complete customer satisfaction. If someone bought something and wasn't happy, Hudson encouraged them to bring it back. These ideas might seem simple today, but at the time, they were bold. Detroit was changing quickly in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Factories grew taller, and new jobs attracted workers from across America and Europe. Streets filled with horses, wagons, and eventually automobiles as Detroit slowly became the center of the automotive industry. J.L. Hudson's store grew with the city. People trusted him. His business expanded so fast that by 1891 he had to relocate to a bigger building near Capitol Park. This growth set the stage for something even more ambitious, the beginning of a giant. By 1911, Hudson and his board made a decision that would alter the skyline of Detroit. They would build a massive flagship store on Woodward Avenue, one that would match the energy, ambition, and dreams of the booming city. Construction began shortly afterward. The building started as a single structure, but over the next decades it would grow again and again, transforming into a complex so large that it eventually became one of the biggest department stores in the entire world. Sadly, Hudson would not live to see the full realization of his dream. He passed away in July 1912, only a short time after construction began. But his vision remained alive in every brick, every beam, and every glowing display window. Between 1911 and 1946, Hudson's expanded in multiple phases. The original store kept growing upward and outward, like a living organism attaching new wings, new floors, and new departments. Architects and engineers blended different styles to keep the entire building flowing together. Early expansions were influenced by Chicago school architecture, a style known for strong, simple lines and wide windows. Later additions included Art Deco touches, giving the building sleek shapes, decorative metal elements, and geometric designs that matched the style of the 1920s and 1930s. Inside, the store operated like a well-run city. It had a complex network of elevators, so people didn't have to climb dozens of staircases. It had pneumatic tubes, long metal pipes that carried small capsules filled with receipts and messages to different departments at high speed. This kept the store operating smoothly, even when thousands of customers filled the building. There were advanced heating systems, cooling systems, and ventilation systems that were considered cutting edge at the time. By the end of World War I, Hudson's had achieved something no one expected. It became the largest department store in the world by total floor space, more than 2.2 million square feet, spread across 33 levels, including 5 basement floors, multiple mezzanines, dozens of retail floors, endless hallways, offices, storage rooms, and service areas. A stepped exterior design that rose like a mountain over downtown Detroit. To Detroiters, Hudson's wasn't just a building. It was a symbol, a sign that their city had arrived, that it was a major force in America, and that the future looked bright. But as the store continued to grow, something else had also begun to grow beneath the surface. A shift in American life was developing, slow, quiet, and unstoppable. And it would eventually challenge everything Hudson's represented. A nation changes. By the 1950s, the United States entered a new era. The end of World War II brought prosperity, and many families could afford more than ever before. With this new comfort came a new trend: suburban living. People dreamed of quiet neighborhoods with green lawns, two-car garages, and wide streets. Highways connected these suburbs to cities, making travel easier. Detroit's population reached its highest point in 1950, around 185 million people. But immediately afterward, the number began to decline. Families moved to the suburbs, farmland became neighborhoods, shopping habits changed. People no longer wanted to drive downtown, find parking, and walk through a crowded city. They wanted convenience, they wanted speed, and retail companies responded. In 1954, Hudson's opened its first suburban branch at Northland Center in Southfield. When it opened, Northland was the largest shopping center in the United States. It didn't just offer shopping, it offered an entire lifestyle. Customers could drive right up to the entrance, park easily, and be inside within minutes. The air conditioning kept the building cool, the layout was simple and modern, everything felt new and streamlined. Northland's success was immediate and enormous. Soon Hudson's opened more suburban stores: Eastland 1957, Westland 1965. Other locations across the metro area in the years that followed. But these new stores came with a price. Every customer who shopped in the suburbs was a customer who didn't come downtown. Foot traffic in the massive Woodward Avenue flagship began to decline, slowly at first, then more noticeably as years passed. Many people didn't realize it, but the downtown store had begun its long, painful slide. Detroit's wider struggles. Hudson's challenges weren't happening in isolation. Detroit itself was going through dramatic change. The 1967 civil unrest pushed even more families and businesses to leave the city. Entire neighborhoods emptied. The 1970s brought new shocks: oil shortages, competition from foreign car companies, and the weakening of the auto industry that had built Detroit's middle class. What had once been one of America's strongest cities was now fighting just to survive. As Detroit began struggling in the 1970s, Hudson's downtown flagship started to feel the pressure more than ever. What had once been a busy maze of shoppers, workers, and holiday celebrations slowly began to grow quieter. The same wide hallways that were once hard to walk through on weekends became strangely empty. Escalators that once carried streams of customers now hummed quietly with only a few riders. The store's massive size, once its proudest feature, became one of its biggest problems. Hudson's tried everything it could to keep people coming downtown. They renovated entire departments, hoping a newer look would bring excitement back. They adjusted prices and updated their merchandise to match changing trends. They ran big advertising campaigns to remind people that the downtown location was still open and still full of holiday magic. But no matter how hard the company tried, the results didn't match the store's former glory. Department by department, floor by floor, the building slowly began to shrink on the inside, not in size, but in activity. Stores inside the store closed. Areas that once buzzed with customers were roped off or turned dark to save money on lights and heating. Whole floors that once held beautiful clothing displays were reduced to a few racks or were left completely empty. The famous restaurants that once served thousands every day struggled as well. In the store's golden age, business people, workers, shoppers, and tourists all filled Hudson's dining areas during lunch hour. Now, with fewer workers downtown and fewer shoppers in the store, the sound of clinking dishes and busy chatter grew quieter. Even Hudson's most magical holiday traditions couldn't escape the decline. The Christmas windows still appeared every year, glowing with mechanical elves, winter villages, and dancing lights. But the crowds grew smaller. Parents who once drove hours just to stand on the sidewalk now stayed closer to home, choosing suburban malls decorated with modern lights, new attractions, and easier parking. Outside, downtown Detroit streets looked different too. Fewer people walked along Woodward Avenue. Fewer stores stayed open after dark. Buildings that were once filled with offices now carried "for lease" signs or sat quietly with empty windows. Inside Hudson's, the atmosphere was changing. Employees who had worked there for decades noticed the difference. The building felt too big for the number of people inside. What was once a lively, crowded center of retail now felt like a grand palace with too many empty rooms. By the early 1980s, the truth was impossible to ignore. The downtown Hudson store was no longer sustainable. It had simply become too large, too expensive to maintain, and too empty to survive. The closure that shocked the city. On January 17, 1983, Hudson's announced something few Detroiters ever believed they would hear. After decades of being the heart of downtown shopping, the store would close its doors. The news traveled through the city like lightning. People felt sadness, shock, and disbelief. Hudson's wasn't just a building. It was a part of their childhood, their memories, their holidays. For older Detroiters, Hudson's was the place where they bought school clothes, where they met friends, or where they rode the elevator up to Toy Town as children. For many families, a yearly visit to see Santa at Hudson's was a tradition stronger than any other. To lose the store felt like losing a piece of the city itself. When the doors finally closed, it marked more than the end of a business. It marked the end of an era. It symbolized the struggles American cities were facing, especially Detroit. Downtown department stores across the country were closing, but the fall of Hudson's felt especially painful because of how deeply it was woven into Detroit's identity. A giant without a purpose. Even after the store closed, the building didn't fall silent immediately. Around 100 employees from Hudson's corporate offices continued to work in the upper levels of the structure. They filled some of the office floors, using the building as headquarters while the company transitioned into something new. This continued for a little over a year, until May 1984, when Hudson's officially merged into the department store division of Dayton Hudson Corporation. After the merger, things changed quickly. By late 1986, all executive teams and buying staff moved to Minneapolis. With that, the enormous Hudson's building, once the busiest retail center in Detroit, became mostly empty. The structure, with its 33 levels and more than 2 million square feet of space, now sat like a silent giant on Woodward Avenue. And a giant with no purpose becomes a difficult problem. Dangerous size, difficult future. In December 1989, the building was sold to Southwestern Associates, a company from Windsor, Ontario. The sale officially ended Hudson's direct link to the building that had defined Detroit's shopping world for generations. The new owners faced a nearly impossible challenge. What do you do with a building this enormous? Repurposing Hudson's was harder than almost anyone expected. Developers suggested many ideas, turning it into a huge office center, dividing it into mixed-use floors, creating a marketplace with small shops, converting parts into apartments, renovating it into a hotel, transforming it into an entertainment complex. But none of the plans succeeded. The reasons were simple and heartbreaking. The building was far too big. The cost would be massive. Detroit's economy was still declining. Investors weren't willing to take the risk. As the early 1990s passed, the building started showing signs of age. Paint peeled, floors cracked, water damage spread. Graffiti appeared. The decline wasn't sudden or violent. It was slow, steady, and sad. The building was slowly losing its battle against time. City officials saw the danger clearly. A massive empty structure in the middle of downtown could not sit forever. Reports showed that repairing the building would be too expensive, and finding a use for it might take decades. Hudson's had once been a symbol of Detroit's power. Now, it was becoming a symbol of Detroit's struggle. The city makes a decision. In 1996, after years of debate and planning, the city of Detroit took control of the property through condemnation. Engineers studied the structure. Economists ran financial projections. Developers examined the potential. And after all the studies were complete, The conclusion was unavoidable. Hudson's had to be demolished. This decision wasn't made lightly. Many people were angry, others were heartbroken. To some, it felt like erasing history. But to the city, leaving the building standing with no purpose was even worse. Detroit needed space for new beginnings, new projects, and new hopes. Preparing for the end. The demolition of a building as enormous as Hudson's was not a simple task. It required months of preparation, careful engineering, and expert precision. Multiple companies were hired to handle the job. Walbridge Aldinger and Jenkins Construction managed the early stages, removing hazardous materials and preparing the structure for collapse. The final demolition would be handled by Controlled Demolition, Inc. They were known for bringing down some of the largest buildings in the world. But Hudson's presented a unique challenge. It was tightly surrounded by other buildings in downtown Detroit. One mistake could cause damage to neighboring structures. Everything had to be perfect. Workers drilled into walls. Explosives were placed carefully throughout the building. Each charge was tested and retested. Computer models predicted how the building would collapse. Engineers studied every detail. Hudson's had stood for nearly 90 years. Now it would fall in seconds. By the autumn of 1998, everything was ready. After nearly a century of standing tall over Detroit, Hudson's was about to take its final bow. The preparation took months, with teams of experts carefully placing explosive charges throughout the structure. Every wire, every hole drilled into concrete, and every bag of explosives was part of a large and precise plan. This was not just any demolition. It was the biggest implosion of a building in downtown Detroit's history. A city gathers to watch an ending. On the chilly afternoon of October 24th, 1998, thousands of people gathered downtown. Some stood quietly with their hands in their pockets. Others talked softly with friends or family, remembering the days when Hudson's was filled with Christmas lights, music, and crowds. Parents held their children on their shoulders, wanting them to witness history, even if they would never fully understand what the building had once meant. Television news crews lined the streets. Reporters waited for the exact moment. Some older Detroiters wiped tears from their eyes. Many of them had childhood memories tied to Hudson's. Memories of seeing Santa, riding the escalators, or walking through the holiday windows. To them, this wasn't just a building coming down. It was like watching a part of their own past disappear. At 5:45 p.m., the countdown began. A voice crackled through speakers, steady and calm, even though the air felt electric with emotion. 10, 9, 8, people held their breath. 3, 2, 1, a thunder that echoed across the city. The first explosion sounded like a heavy thump, followed by another and another, each one echoing off nearby buildings. The ground trembled, windows rattled, a wave of sound rolled through the streets. The explosions were timed perfectly, traveling down through the building in a sequence that would make it collapse inward like a folding card. For a split second, Hudson seemed frozen, as if resisting the fall, and then suddenly it gave way. The enormous structure crumbled toward the center, floors folding down onto one another. The collapse took only a few seconds, but to the thousands watching, it felt strangely slow, almost dreamlike. A huge cloud of dust exploded into the air, rising up like a storm and rolling through downtown streets. People covered their faces with scarves and sleeves, though many stood rooted in place, staring at the empty space where Hudson's had stood just moments before. When the dust finally began to settle, Detroit's skyline looked different. The building that had once towered over Woodward Avenue was gone. All that remained was a mountain of rubble and a hollow silence. The heart of downtown had lost one of its oldest, strongest symbols, an empty space filled with memories. After the implosion, workers spent weeks clearing the debris. Crushed bricks, twisted metal beams, broken glass, and shattered concrete were loaded into trucks and hauled away. The site that had once held one of the world's largest department stores was now just a flat, empty space. The lot measured 2.1 acres, but it felt much bigger. It was surrounded by busy streets and tall buildings, yet somehow looked lonely, a reminder of everything Detroit had lost over the years. For many residents, the empty space brought mixed emotions. Some felt heartbreak, remembering Hudson's as the place where they bought their first suit, had their first job, or saw their children smile in Santaland. Others felt a quiet sadness, knowing that their city had once been so powerful, with booming industries and shining stores, and now was facing the painful reality of decline. But there were also Detroiters who believed the demolition was necessary. They saw the empty lot not as a symbol of failure, but as a chance for something new, a chance to build something that could help downtown come back to life. The long wait for a new beginning. Even after the debris was cleared, the site remained undeveloped for many years. It became one of the most famous empty lots in the city. People passed by daily, imagining what could one day rise there. Developers pitched ideas, some talked about office towers, others imagined apartments, hotels, or cultural centers. But the economy struggled. Downtown Detroit needed investment, and large projects seemed too risky. Throughout the early 2000s, the Hudson's block stayed quiet. Grass sprouted here and there. A few events were held on the lot, but nothing lasting. It was strange to see such a large, empty space right in the middle of a major American city. It almost felt like a missing tooth in a smile, something clearly absent that had once defined the entire look. In many ways, the empty lot became a symbol of Detroit itself, full of history, full of potential, but waiting for new life. The fact that Hudson's had once been the largest department store in the world by floor space made the emptiness even more noticeable. People joked that you could land a helicopter in the space. Others said it felt like a ghost zone, a piece of land that still held memories even though nothing stood on it anymore. Why development was so difficult? Building on the Hudson site was far more complicated than people realized. The land was valuable, but it also came with challenges. Its enormous size meant any project had to be large and expensive. Developers needed strong financial backing. Detroit's economy was unpredictable. Investors were cautious. The city needed something impressive, not just a simple building. For nearly 20 years, proposals came and went. Some ideas were creative, some practical, and some unrealistic. But none came to life. The site simply waited. A new vision finally takes shape. After years of uncertainty, a plan finally began to emerge. A plan known as Hudson's Detroit. This new development aimed to build something that respected the past, while also pushing the city forward into the future. The project included modern architecture, new public spaces, and the hope of bringing people back to downtown. While the new project would look nothing like the original store, its name was a reminder of what once stood there. It acknowledged the history while offering a fresh start. For many Detroiters, the beginning of construction felt like a moment of healing. After decades of waiting, something new was finally rising, where the old Hudson's had once stood. It wouldn't replace the memories, but it would allow the land to have a future again, instead of remaining frozen in the past. A story, larger than a store. The story of Hudson's, its rise, its golden age, its decline, and its final fall, mirrors the story of Detroit itself. Both began with ambition, grew into something extraordinary, and then struggled as times changed. Both experienced decline, abandonment, and broken dreams. And both eventually found the strength to rebuild. To this day, people still share their memories of Hudson's. The smell of roasted nuts and cones, the magical Christmas windows, the 9-story tree, Santa Land and Toy Town. The restaurants filled with chatter, the wide aisles buzzing with life, the feeling of being inside a palace of shopping and imagination. Hudson's may be gone, but its story continues to live in the hearts of those who experienced its magic. Even after the rubble was cleared and the dust faded, the memory of Hudson stayed alive in the hearts of people who had grown up in Detroit. For many, it wasn't just a department store or a place to buy things. It was a part of their childhood, a place where they shared moments with family, friends, and sometimes even strangers. When a building becomes woven into daily life for so many generations, its disappearance feels personal, almost like losing a relative. Even people who had moved away from Detroit found themselves thinking about the store again when they saw news of the demolition. Videos of the implosion spread across television and newspapers. Former residents called each other, saying things like, "Do you remember the Christmas windows?" or I can still picture that huge tree in the atrium. Entire families sat around kitchen tables, reminiscing about the days when the store was busy and alive. Memories that never fade. Some adults remembered standing in long lines to see Santa, clutching their parents' coats and shivering with excitement. Others remembered working in the store, stocking shelves, fitting shoes, running the cash registers, or carrying packages for customers. For many Detroiters, Hudson's was their first job, their first paycheck, or the place where they learned responsibility, teamwork, and customer service. There were people who got engaged inside the store's famous restaurant. Others remembered the smell of perfume drifting from the cosmetic counters, or the sound of the announcement speakers calling out department numbers. It wasn't just a store. It was a world inside a building, a universe of memories that had shaped lives. During the holidays, families often made a whole day out of visiting Hudson's. They rode the old streetcars or buses downtown, stopped at a diner afterward, or went to see a movie. The entire adventure was part of the holiday season. Even when people grew older and had children of their own, they brought their kids to Hudson's, wanting them to feel the same wonder they had felt decades earlier. For many Detroiters, the moment the store collapsed was the moment a chapter of their lives closed forever. The store that taught a city how to dream. Hudson's influence stretched far beyond holiday displays. The store helped shape Detroit's identity at a time when the city was growing faster than almost any other place in America. It represented confidence, innovation, and a sense of pride. When Detroit's auto industry soared, Hudson's soared with it. When Detroit's factories roared day and night, Hudson's welcomed their workers, their families, and their excitement. The store showed the world what American retail could be. At its peak, Hudson's was a shining example of what a department store could achieve. Endless variety, luxury at every corner, and creative displays that brought imagination to life. In many ways, Hudson's helped set the standard for department stores across the nation. Other cities built their own grand stores, inspired by what Detroit had created. Holiday displays became a tradition across America, partly because Hudson's popularized the idea. Large atrium Christmas trees, Santa's workshops, toy demonstrations, and downtown parades during November and December. All of these became common because Hudson showed how powerful these experiences could be. Even suburban malls learned from Hudson's strategies. They copied the idea of having multiple departments, anchor stores, convenient layouts, and seasonal displays. But no matter how many malls opened, nothing could fully capture the feeling of walking through the original Hudson's downtown store. Why Hudson's couldn't be saved. When people ask why such an iconic place had to be destroyed, the reasons are both emotional and practical. The emotional reason is simple. Detroiters loved the store and hated losing it. The practical reason is far more complicated. Hudson's was an enormous building, too big for modern use. It had 33 levels, basement floors, parking challenges, and endless maintenance needs. Downtown traffic had decreased. Businesses had left the city center. And the auto industry, once the mighty engine of Detroit, had weakened. Even if someone had tried to turn Hudson's into apartments, offices, or a hotel, the cost would have been enormous. The building needed major repairs, and the economy simply wasn't stable enough. Developers looked at the numbers again and again, but the math never worked. The property became a financial burden that no investor could take on without huge risk. For these reasons, the city made the difficult choice: demolition. To many, it felt like the end of an era, and it was. But the decision also opened a new possibility for Detroit's future, a symbol of loss and a symbol of hope. After the implosion, the empty Hudson's block became a quiet reminder of everything the city had gone through. It showed how quickly fortunes can change. In just a few decades, Detroit went from booming growth to painful decline. Factories closed, jobs disappeared, families moved away, abandoned buildings filled the skyline. The Hudson's lot, sitting in the center of downtown, represented these changes clearly and painfully. But the empty space also symbolized potential. It was a blank canvas waiting for new life. The city began to dream again, slowly at first, then with more confidence. Developers talked about creating something that could honor the past while pointing toward the future. When plans for Hudson's Detroit were announced, it felt like a turning point. The new project promised modern architecture, new public spaces, and fresh energy for downtown. It wouldn't be the same as the original store, but it didn't need to be. It simply needed to bring new purpose to a site that had been silent for too long. The new development carried a name that would remind future generations of what once stood there. In many ways, the name Hudson's became a bridge, connecting Detroit's proud history with its hopes for revival. Lessons from a lost landmark. The rise and fall of Hudson's teaches us many lessons about cities, people, and the passage of time. First, it shows how powerful dreams can be. One boy from England built a small business that grew into one of America's greatest stores. Vision, hard work, and determination transformed a simple idea into a massive landmark. Second, Hudson's shows how fragile success can be. Even great buildings, great companies, and great cities must adapt. When times change, standing still becomes dangerous. Third, the story reminds us that memories do not depend on buildings. The walls may fall, but the emotions, traditions, and experiences stay alive. Fourth, Hudson shows how deeply a place can shape a community. A store isn't just a place to spend money. It can be a place where families gather, traditions form, and dreams take shape. A final walk through the past. If someone today were to stand on the Hudson site and close their eyes, they could almost imagine the building still standing. They might picture the glowing holiday windows drawing crowds on a snowy evening. They might imagine the escalators humming, the smell of popcorn in the air, and the sound of joyful children waiting to meet Santa. They might think about the employees who spent their lives helping customers, or the families who made Hudson's part of their yearly traditions. Even though the building is gone, the legacy remains. Hudson's continues to live in stories, photographs, memories, and family traditions passed down through generations. A story that belongs to everyone. Hudson's is not just the story of a department store. It is the story of a city, a community, and a changing America. It represents ambition, hard work, joy, and deep sadness. It shows how buildings can rise like giants and fall like forgotten monuments. But it also shows how the human spirit continues, even when physical structures disappear. Detroit still remembers Hudson's, and as long as people share their experiences, the holiday magic, the department floors, the toy displays, the parades, and the memories, Hudson's will never truly be gone.